Have you ever just stopped and thought about how absolutely wild it is that we all start as a single cell and end up as beings who can write poetry, debate the meaning of life, or even just wonder about things? It is an incredible journey. Today, we're going to unpack that whole process, piece by piece, and see exactly how a mind gets built.
So let's kick things off with a big question, right? How in the world do we get from a baby's first babbles to a philosopher's complex debate? It seems like an impossible leap, but it's a journey that every single one of us has taken.
And here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start at the very, very beginning, just 3 weeks in, when the whole nervous system first sparks to life. Then we'll jump ahead to age 2 to see how toddlers figure out that the world still exists even when they can't see it. Around age 7, we'll dive into how our core beliefs about our own abilities take root. And finally, we'll look at age 11 and beyond, when that amazing capacity for abstract thought really kicks into high gear. Let's do this.
Okay, our story has to start with the hardware itself, the brain. Before any thought, before any feeling, that biological blueprint has to be laid down. And believe me, it happens unbelievably fast.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It's amazing. At only 3 to 4 weeks, a simple little tube forms. And that tube? That's the precursor to everything. It quickly splits into the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. By 6 weeks, you can actually see the cerebellum, the powerhouse for movement. And by 20 weeks, the part of your brain that handles all the automatic stuff, like breathing and your heartbeat, is already in place. It's an incredible piece of biological engineering, and it's all happening before we ever take our first breath.
So, the brain's basic structure is coming online. The hardware is booting up. But how does a child start using it to make sense of the world? For that, we've got to turn to the legendary psychologist Jean Piaget. He came up with this brilliant idea of mental building blocks that help us organize every single thing we experience.
Piaget called these building blocks schemas. And a schema is, it's basically a mental folder where you store what you know about something. You have a schema for chair, for car, for bird. You've got one for literally everything. They are the fundamental units of all of our knowledge.
So how does this actually work in the real world? Okay, picture a toddler. They see a dog for the very first time. It's got 4 legs, it's furry, it has a tail. Their brain creates a brand new mental folder, a new schema, and slaps a label on it. Doggy. Simple enough, right? But this is where things get really interesting. Now watch how these schemas grow and change. The next day, that same child sees a cat. Well, it also has 4 legs and is furry, so they reach for their existing folder and shout, "Doggy!" Piaget called this assimilation. You're basically trying to fit a new experience into an old box. But then a parent says, "No, sweetie, that's a cat." Now the child has to update their whole system. They have to create a new folder just for cat. This is accommodation, and it is the very engine of how we learn. This process of building schemas means that a young child's view of the world is, by definition, still a work in progress. So how can we actually see this limited perspective in action? Piaget came up with a really clever experiment that shows us exactly what's going on. It's called the 3-mountain task, and here's how it works. A child sits in front of this model of 3 different mountains. Then, a doll is placed on the other side of the model, looking at it from a completely different angle. The researcher then asks the child a really simple question. What does the doll see from its perspective? And the result is absolutely fascinating. Kids between about 2 and 7 years old almost always describe what they see, not what the doll sees. Now, this isn't them being selfish. Piaget called it egocentrism. They literally can't compute a different point of view yet. Their cognitive operating system just hasn't gotten that software update. Okay, so as kids start to grow beyond that egocentric stage, another absolutely crucial factor comes into play: what they believe about their own ability to learn. And this is where the whole idea of mindset becomes everything. The psychologist Carol Dweck discovered that we tend to adopt one of 2 core beliefs. A fixed mindset is the idea that your intelligence is just set in stone. You're either born smart or you're not. End of story. A growth mindset, on the other hand, is the belief that you can develop your abilities through dedication and hard work. So that begs a huge question. Where do these mindsets even come from? Well, a fascinating study looked into exactly that by analyzing how parents praise their kids, and the results were pretty eye-opening. First of all, it turns out that praise is way more rare than you think. It only made up about 3% of all parental comments. And that praise was split pretty evenly between process praise, things like you worked so hard, and person praise, like you're so smart. But here's where things got really interesting. When they broke the data down by gender, a huge pattern just jumped off the page. Boys were getting way more process praise for their effort. Girls, on the other hand, were more likely to get person praise, being told they were good or smart.
And right there, that's the crucial link. The researchers followed these same kids for 5 years, and they found that the more processed praise a child got early on, the more likely they were to have a growth mindset years down the road. Praising the effort teaches a kid that effort itself is the path to success.
This focus on effort is the perfect bridge to our next section. A growth mindset gives you the will to practice, but what is actually happening in the brain when you do it? How does all that knowledge turn into real skill? Cognitive scientist Daniel Willingham puts it so bluntly, I love it. Factual knowledge precedes skill. In other words, you can't think critically about something you know nothing about. You have to stock your mental library with facts before you can get creative or solve complex problems.
And the way we build that library is all through practice. When you learn something new, it goes into your really fragile short-term memory. To make it stick, you have to practice it, you have to repeat it. With enough effort, that information gets transferred over into your long-term memory. And once it's locked in there, it becomes automatic, which frees up your mental bandwidth to tackle even harder problems. Okay, so we've built the brain, we've learned how to form concepts, we've adopted a mindset, and we've turned knowledge into skill. We're at the final and maybe the most uniquely human part of our story, developing a moral compass. The psychologist Lawrence Kohlberg argued that our moral reasoning grows in stages. At the very first level, a young child's morality is all about self-interest. How do I avoid getting in trouble? Then, most of us move to a conventional level, where morality is about following social rules and laws to keep things orderly. But Kohlberg believed there was one more step. The post-conventional stage. This is where morality is based on these abstract, universal principles, like justice and human rights, that might actually conflict with the law. But here's the really startling part. It's estimated that only about 10% of the adult population consistently reaches this level of moral reasoning. But morality isn't just about logic. It's also built on a foundation of empathy. And that capacity also grows in stages. An infant feels something called global empathy. One baby cries, they all start crying. Later, as they overcome that egocentrism we saw in the mountain task, they can start to genuinely respond to someone else's feelings. And by the time they're 10 to 12, that empathy can expand to the problems of entire groups of people they've never even met. So, from a simple neural tube all the way to a complex moral mind, the process of building a mind is this constant journey of connecting and refining. We've seen the hardware form, the software get written, and our beliefs and principles start to take shape. It all leads to one final thought. If this really is a lifelong journey, what part of your own mind is still under construction?